Welcome to BAM It with John, Michael, and Mari, covering all things business, accounting, marketing, management, and IT. The place where businesses and entrepreneurs find the forest through the trees.
Hello and welcome to BAM It. This is Mari Peterson of Marketing Outpost, and of course I have with me...
I am John Michael Cletus with Peridot Consulting.
And we want to say thank you for joining us. Today was interesting fact. John Michael?
Did you talk about what we're talking about today?
Nope, I'm going to let you take it.
You're going to let me take it? So we have a guest in-house today, and it's Alyssa Phillips. And poor Alyssa has to sit here and watch Mario and I make fun of each other while we do these intros. Alyssa is with AMP Designs, and as you guys know, Mario does marketing consulting, and we decided for this episode and the next episode to bring in people within the marketing industry. And what Alyssa does is graphic designs specifically. So I'll let you say hello real quick.
Hey.
Okay, good.
That sounds awfully familiar. That's the same introduction I recorded a minute ago.
So for those listeners out there, this is our fourth take on this intro, but we're going to move on so that we don't have to do a fifth take. We're just going to go with this one because Mari was so excellent on the first four or three. Well, anyways, that's podcast life out there for you guys. So we're talking about graphic design, all things graphic design, and all things about Alyssa and her background. But as always, we like to start with interesting facts to segue us into the topic. And my interesting fact, I'm just, we're talking about logos today or partly logos today. So I just like to talk about, just what some people may or may not notice in logos. So for example, the Tostito bag chips, they actually, the two T's in the I, it's like two guys dipping in salsa. Have you ever seen that before?
I've never noticed that.
Yeah, it's
now
two guys.
I'm going to look at that.
Exactly. You have to look at the Tostitos logo, and it's two guys dipping salsa. And one thing that to some people it was obvious, some not, but the FedEx logo between the D and the E, there's an arrow that's pointing to the right, like it's always moving. Once you see it, you never not see it. But if you've never seen it, you're like, wow. So look at FedEx, and there's an arrow. Very obvious arrow. Have you seen that before, Mari?
I don't know. Maybe not.
Okay, so Mari's ignorant of that one as well. And the Amazon logo, it's got the smiley face, but it's actually an arrow pointing from the A to the Z because they have everything from A to Z.
So I would like to say I'm so impressed with our John Michael and his talk on logo and brand design. Is that so far the makeup of your interesting fact?
You don't think those were interesting, Mari?
Well, they were kind of cool little tidbits, but when we think of graphic design, it is a huge umbrella, and it covers many, many different things. So when people think of graphic design, they just really have a hard time pinpointing what aspect of marketing that really covers. So Alyssa here does a very specific aspect of graphic design, and care to describe what that is?
Yeah, sure. So I focus on branding, which encompasses logo design, but I think branding is also a pretty broad term, and I kind of like to define it as the personality of the brand, and that it can be outside of design too. It's really like how you present yourself, how you talk about yourself on social media, the tone you use when you write, and that kind of stuff. But I focus on the visual aspects of branding, so the logo, the colors, the fonts, and how all of that is consistent across all the design pieces that you produce.
So I think that really is more than just cool little elements within the brand itself.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that point that part of what I think makes successful design is having a concept deeper than something that just looks nice. So like the example of Amazon with the arrow pointing from A to Z, that's really cool because a lot of people don't really immediately think that, but it is something that you might pick up on eventually or realize subconsciously that kind of like drills that message of that company into your brain without you really realizing it. So
subliminal messaging.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to ask you in a little bit is, because there is a lot of subconscious elements of
subliminal
logo.
Cultish, like it sounds
like the Toblerone chocolates has a bear in the mountain, and like in this it's the little things that. But Mark, let's go back to the base, because during one of our 3 or 4 takes beginning, you actually had an interesting fact that you were going to talk about.
Well, that sounded funny. I guess I don't normally have interesting facts. Alyssa and I have actually known each other for quite a bit. She's a part of our Boiler Room networking group here in Asheville. And I first met Alyssa, actually, I saw her stuff on Instagram and I was immediately impressed. And so I reached out to her, and it turned out that we had a mutual contact, which was actually John Michael here. So it's funny how things always come full circle, in work and in life. So she and I were talking about logo and branding design, and we were talking about the history. And so where did the history of branding actually come from?
Yeah, well, it's funny because my mind goes immediately to cattle. And when we were talking about it, turned out that was true.
Yeah, branding actually started from the concept of it, started with cattle in the many years ago, before we had fences and actual physical boundaries out west. All the cattle farmers and so forth had to brand their cattle in order to identify which ones were theirs. And so as the, industrial revolution came along and we started getting railroads and they would deliver products and goods across the United States, this is kind of like how Sears started with the Sears catalog. They would put everything into a cargo box and stick it on the train, and then they would stamp the cargo box with a similar, brand in order to identify what was in there and whose company it was for delivery purposes. So I find that very interesting that the whole, nexus beginning of branding really started out as a need, to identify something. And then it just grew from there as people were like, it's not good enough just to stamp my name on something. We need to have a color. And people started to recognize those images with those products. And then later on, it became part of the messaging, because as you knew a company, you started to identify its character and personality, as you said earlier, with that look and design.
Mm-hmm. Which is really not all that different from why they started branding cattle anyway. They're trying to mark what was theirs. And so now, essentially, you're just putting a mark on what makes things unique to you. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's that immediate image. And when Alyssa and I were talking while Mari was trying to get the computer set up and stuff, which she still hasn't turned off her notifications on her computer, we were talking about logo recognition, just chit-chatting, and she drew on her paper. I'll let her explain this example, how when she uses it.
Yeah, well, if you can picture it, I drew a circle and then inside of it, another circle.
So she, not to be too explanative here, but she drew a target on her paper and was immediately just like, I immediately was like, oh, that's Target. And that was the point she was making. At the immediate recognizability of these logos and how you associate these with the brands.
So the visual image is a reflection of not only what that company does, but also its character and personality, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So how about telling us, when you first introduce yourself to somebody or they ask you what you do, what is the first usual stereotypical reaction?
Well, I think it depends on how in depth I go. If I just say I'm a graphic designer, since that's such a broad term, usually they will need to know specifically what I do, or they will assume that I do something that has nothing to do with what I do. Like, they'll assume I do web design, which I do, but they'll assume that's all I do. Or they'll assume that I do, just design business cards all day, or something like that. So I usually try and go a little bit more in depth and just explain that I do logo design and branding and, other areas as well. But
yeah, so what I think with a stereotype in your industry is what you're saying is that sometimes when you mention graphic design or website or whatever, you just think that it's just, you do something with computers. That's the generic stereotype. But more specifically in graphic design, there's a stereotype in the industry that all you did is that one end product. For example, the Target logo. Oh, you just did 2 circles. That's great. But beyond that stereotype, how involved is that process to get to that Target logo?
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely another stereotype that I think is often projected onto designers, which is that people tend to think that, this is fun for us, so it must be so easy, like to just, sit down and draw a logo and it takes 10 minutes. And yes, it is fun. I do love doing it, but it's hard to have a successful logo that really expresses a lot about your company. There's a lot of research that goes into that. Everything from me interviewing the business and learning about them to doing my own research on their competitors and their audience and the things that they told me. And often this whole process takes somewhere between 20 and 30 hours. So it's really not just like, oh, you said you're a bakery, here's a cupcake with your name under it.
It's going to be perfect, and they're going to love that first draft and the colors. There's a lot of back and forth. I just know from being on the customer end of having logos in the past, and you interview the client, you get their basic concept, you present, I don't know, a number of.
Well, how about Alyssa talk about her process? What is your process when you work with a client?
It's similar to what you mentioned. So I start with a questionnaire that I walk through that goes a little bit more in depth about the specific things that they do, what their business is about, but also things like their values, their goals, and what they want their customers to think about them and things like that. And then I take all that info and do the research that I just mentioned. And I designed 3 options for the first round that each express the values and messages that they talked about. And then with whichever option they feel most drawn to, we have some time to tweak and make some revisions because I want it to be effective, but I also want them to like it. And then once it's finalized, I deliver files and other things that I can get into if you'd like, but yeah.
Well, I recently completed a project with Alyssa because I really wanted to understand her process, and I liked what she has done before. Like I said, I discovered her on Instagram, and then I thought, I think she would be a good person to try out on some swag that I was creating for my company. So in going through the process, one of the pieces I liked that she did was I had a vision, and then she kind of added the practical element of it, because if I really pursued that vision 100%, I think a t-shirt to make would have cost me about $100. And I decided I didn't want my t-shirts to cost $100 to make. And so she gave some really good practical advice on how we could still achieve what we wanted, but also be practical about the complete application of it.
I'm glad you thought so.
So that's something that I think is important in when you work with a design professional. It's not just about achieving the maximum creative outlook, but you really do, at the end of the day, you're a business and you also have to be practical.
Yeah, and I would add that, of course, you want it to look good. And of course, I want my clients to like what I've designed. But it is important to have something beyond just a pretty logo because of that kind of like subliminal messaging that I mentioned, I guess for lack of a better term. But having something that really speaks to the deeper meaning of your brand ultimately better speaks to the people that you want to work with, and it attracts the customers that you want and kind of just helps your business grow.
I think a design can be a magnet or it can be a detraction. So I have seen some designs where I'm like, ugh, I don't like that, and it gives you a different kind of feeling. So I think design is extremely important when you talk about what is a company and what is a brand. It's either going to be a magnet to you of the kind of customers that you want, or it's going to repel the ones that you don't want, or even possibly repel the ones that you do want. So you have to be careful about that.
My biggest realization about this process, coming from somebody that's on the total opposite end of the business spectrum with accounting and stuff, is just how much work goes in behind that logo or that brand. And it's not only you're carrying the logo as a representative of the brand, and you alluded to it earlier, the brand is way more than just a logo. And there's just so much that leads up to it, so much thought, so many things to consider that the average person wouldn't think to consider. And what are some examples of things that people should consider when they're thinking about their logo? I mean,
Yeah, some of the questions that I ask when I go through my questionnaire that I think people often seem to find thoughtful or that kind of prompt them to think are what are your three main values as a business? What do you want your customers to think of you after working with you? And I mean, I also like to ask about like their goals as a business.
so you talk about the three values, which I just think it's great that when you are talking to somebody, usually I would think you'd be like, well, what's your favorite color? What's your name? But one of the first things you ask them is, what are your values? And you ask them, what do you want people to think of your business? It's very thoughtful, very in-depth processes.
And it actually has nothing to do with design. As far as when people think of design, they think of color and shape and some sort of maybe symbol or something like that. But you're really asking them more about the business itself.
Yeah, that's true. And I definitely do ask if they have preferences for certain colors. I mean, if they have an aversion to orange, I don't want to find out after I've like designed a whole orange campaign.
Yeah.
But I think that those types of questions are really helpful for determining things that can make a logo more unique and specific to your specific business. I think one principle that I think is interesting and I try to adhere to is that you shouldn't be able to put another business's name into your logo and have it still work. So
I like that.
Of course, there can be a little bit of crossover. Like maybe there might be two organic bakeries that have very similar values, and maybe you can't really nitpick that too hard. But you shouldn't be able to put like the name of a gym into the logo of a bakery or something like that. So I think that thinking about what makes your business different, not in the services that you offer, but in what you want your customers to think and how you want to make people feel, that helps create a look that helps you stand out more.
It's a signature in a way of that company. And I think one thing that I really liked in working with Alyssa that most people wouldn't think about in choosing somebody to design their logo or anything else really is that she listens really well. So the soft skills that are required in working with somebody is you need somebody that's going to really listen so that she can kind of pinpoint all those things out of you, because sometimes you don't really know where to start. And what do you do with a client that doesn't know where to start?
I mean, so I do talk to them a bit before we start the process. So I would say that not everybody doesn't immediately think of these things until I ask them, but most businesses will know how to answer them. So if they feel like they're so early in their business that they don't know their values, or they don't know who their ideal customer is, then that might be a spot where I would bring in you, a marketing professional, to kind of help them nail that stuff down, because those things are really important to having a successful visual brand. You definitely don't want to like dive into the design process and then later realize you're marketing to the wrong customer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now let's backtrack for just a minute, because I said that you live here in Asheville, but you haven't always been here. What is your background? How did you get into graphic design? And how did you get to Asheville?
Well, I got into graphic design in middle school because I really loved music and I liked going to concerts and supporting local bands. So I decided that I was going to design band t-shirts for the rest of my life when I grew up.
Wow.
So
I like that.
So I went to school in New York City. I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. It's a design school. And my degree is in communications design, focused on graphic design. But while I was there, I interned at Atlantic Records, and it was an amazing experience. I loved it, but I realized that after like learning so much in my classes, I really missed the conceptual aspect of design. Not that that can't be in any type of design for music, but I really missed like learning about businesses and doing a lot of research and coming up with a conceptual design that's not just like take this photo and slap some bold text on it for this album cover. So I kind of like switched gears and realized that my passion was really for branding as much as I love music design and still enjoy doing it. So after I graduated, I worked for a couple of design studios in New York. The last place that I worked for, I was an art director at a print company. And then my boyfriend and I were really tired of living in New York. So we were thinking about moving. And long story short, one day I was at work and he texted me, just put in my 2 weeks so we can move. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll do that too. So I did.
Wow.
And I think it was like 4 weeks later, we moved here. And I thought that seemed like the perfect opportunity to try my own thing.
And then you started your own company at that point.
Yeah.
And it's AMP Designs. And if you mind me asking the name AMP, where did that come from?
Yes. In middle school, I was like, oh, cool. It's like a guitar amp, but it's also my initials.
Oh.
So all throughout high school and college, my website was always ampeddesigns.com. And when I started working for myself, I was using my name for a little while. And then I was like, why reinvent the wheel? I might as well just do AMP Designs. So
your initials are AMP.
Mm-hmm. But I think it also applies to branding because I do like to say that I try to amplify brands.
No, I think that's great. It's the coincidence, the coincidental factor.
It was lucky.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So working the way you do in your industry, what do you think is the best thing about what you do? What do you like the best?
Well, I mean, it's definitely I guess for me, rewarding to see my design like out in the world, but it's also really, I like the idea of like helping people grow, and design can definitely do that. I also really love the education aspect of it because a lot of the businesses that I work with have never worked with a designer before, or they're just getting started. So this is their first business. So I like being able to kind of guide them through the process and help them see what design can do for them and kind of form that relationship and keep working with them and keep helping them meet their needs.
Yeah, and I'm envious in a way because you do see your work out there. I mean, you do see your logo on.
You mean
T-shirt.
nobody shows off their tax return?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm always envious of proof of product. And anywhere from
your proof of product gets filed somewhere.
My proof of product is who knows what my proof.
Well,
but anyways, yeah, I don't want to talk about my woe is me moment, but it is, I'm sure, a rewarding situation where you may happen to see your logo on a t-shirt, or you see it on the website, or you see it, and that's just a great feeling, I bet, for you.
Yeah, I would say that the most rewarding thing, I definitely don't like talking myself up, but the most rewarding thing is after I presented logos for the first time, like the first time they're seeing them, is when someone says like, wow, you really understood what I do, or
oh, wow.
Thanks for taking the time to do something that fits so well, or something like that. That always makes me feel really good because I'm usually very anxious going into the presentation. So yeah.
That speaks to your listening skills, though.
I
you do
so.
a very good job with listening. I experienced that with you. So conversely, what would you say would be some of the challenges, or not necessarily the worst thing, but maybe some of the challenges you face?
I definitely don't mean to put too negative a spin on anything, but I would say that there is a challenge in the industry overall when it comes to communicating the value of design, because there are a lot of really low-cost resources out there. People can go online and get a logo for $10. So I've had people say, well, why would I pay you your rate when I can get this? And it's like, well, then get that. It's not going to be the same quality, but...
Because like you said, you shouldn't be able to take anybody's name and stick it in your design and it fits. And that's kind of what those templated designs are meant to do, is where they just take a bunch of symbols really or styles and really throw a name in there, but it really may not exude all the qualities that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely recognize that people are at different places in their businesses, and different businesses have different needs. Like some businesses, maybe it does not make sense for them to have a branded logo design process, and that's fine. But yeah, overall, I would say that it is kind of difficult sometimes, considering that there is so much out there that is a lot easier
I think that is a
do.
challenge overall in marketing, is that do-it-yourself aspect. There's a lot of do-it-yourself marketing tools out there. And so that is a challenge in saying what your value is.
Yeah, I mean, there's a time and a place for everything. I mean, from tax return, there's TurboTax, and with design, there's whatever. And every place has their positives. To your saying that some people are not in a place either financially that maybe their heart would be, yes, I want to go hire Alyssa to do all this. We just can't afford to do that. But they do need to have something to stick on their letterhead. So there's a time and a place. And I think where you come in is when people are ready to own that brand. If they've got the financial means, great. If not, if they're ready to own and really take their business to a recognizable level, that's where you can come in and really hone it in for them.
There are a lot of small businesses that start off that really, as you said earlier, have not identified their target audience or don't really understand what their values are, and they're just eager to get started. So I can see doing that, but then later on down the road, they decide, now we're ready. Now let's go through that process.
Yeah, definitely.
So I see that.
So do you see any big opportunities in your industry as a whole coming up with the changing environment?
Overall, across the industry?
Sure. I would think there's a lot more startups these days.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this might not be quite as broad, but in Asheville, it's definitely a good place to be a graphic designer because of that. There are a lot of small businesses. It's a very entrepreneurial town, and there are a lot of designers that work for themselves too. So it's a good community for us to be in, not only because there's a lot of potential for work, but there's a lot of potential for like collaborators and other people who do the same thing that you do that you can bounce ideas off of and get to know. So,
well, speaking of that, you also helped start a chapter here for creative professionals. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm the vice president of Asheville's new AIGA chapter, and that stands for American Institute of Graphic Arts. It is a national organization, and Asheville's the 75th chapter, and it is basically a group open to creative industries. So everything from graphic design, photography, videography, to marketing, copywriting, and even businesses that interface with design, like printers. And it's meant to form collaborative relationships amongst those groups and also help educate on best practices, as well as, you know, how to run your business if you work for yourself, and educating the public on what it's like to work with a designer, and just kind of promoting design and creative arts overall. So, and
not only are you the vice president, but you're also a founder and one of the reasons that group's in this town. That's correct, right?
Yeah. The president and we kind of initiated the formation, but we were really lucky that there was already a smaller, well, not smaller, there was a kind of informal design group that was meeting that another designer, Jenny Fairs, had been spearheading. So we had a lot of interest when we started our chapter. A lot of that group was already really interested in AIGA, so we were pretty fortunate about that.
That's great, and good for you for doing that.
Well, I like all the speakers that you've brought in. You've done a great job with really providing some educational components.
Yeah, we have a really good team. Our board is very strong.
Okay. So where do you see your, what you do, graphic design, branding, going in the next 5, 10, 15 years, the trend line of that industry?
Well, I do think, because like I mentioned, there are so many online resources and it's so easy for people to DIY things now, that that's something that a lot of designers are going to have to take into consideration, whether we are like competing with that or somehow fitting in with that. That might be something we have to navigate. And then it's always interesting to just think about in 10 years how different technology could be and what that means for design as well. Because 10 years ago, I mean, print was a lot bigger than it is now. Now web is more. I'm sure that we're going to continue going in that direction, but what else is there going to be in 10 years?
Right.
So
I agree with you there. I think digital and technology is going to really affect it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and talking about technology, I think you alluded to it, how it will affect your industry moving forward is in those ways. And I guess do you use like a design software? That's probably an ignorant question.
I do, yes. I use Adobe software.
And is that, I guess, anticipated just to get stronger and better, I guess, as technology comes along?
Probably. I mean, I don't know. There could be new programs. I have no idea. I mean,
Well, being the old fart that I am, I do remember way back in the day when you had somebody design a logo, for example, you would get the logo and it would just be the same placement because really it didn't look that different from a business card to back then letterhead, stuff like that. But now when you get a logo designed, you have to say, well, I also need a horizontal and a vertical format because I need something that'll fit within the social profile pictures and the cover images. And now, would you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always include a couple different iterations because, like you said, if it's very horizontal, what if you're putting it in like a standing banner or something? Then it's going to be super small when you have to shrink it down. So I would also include a vertical version, and more often than not, I include a round version that usually works well on Instagram, but also works in square formats or just, stickers, things like that. It's nice to have different options and not be just boxed into this one size.
And I think that speaks to how technology has really kind of changed design because of social media. And then everybody needed their logo to fit within the social profiles. And then now I would say in the future, I see it being maybe more interactive. What do you think about that? Like, because it's online, that design can actually kind of have movement.
Yeah, that's something that I was talking with somebody about recently, about how it seems like certain large brands on Instagram are using a lot of motion and animation in their posts. And I don't know how that could translate to branding. I'm sure that could translate to logos. I mean, there are companies that have animated logos or animations for their logos. But yeah, it could be kind of interesting to think about how motion is a part of the brand more than people probably do now.
So to round this out, I'd like to ask you, what sort of clients do you work with?
Well, I guess on the surface, mostly small businesses and entrepreneurs. I love working with local businesses because I can meet them in person, but that's definitely not a must because I can do video calls. But I guess deeper than that, I like working with people who are really passionate about what they're doing. So people who love their business and are excited about its growth and excited about their customers and really can get behind what they're doing. Those are the type of people that I like to collaborate with.
Okay. I can see that too. And having worked with you, I know she really enjoys that. And we've had some really good discussions. And it's amazing how you start with one concept and then where it ends up at the end of the process.
Yeah. And I'm so envious and admirable, is that a term, of that process, because it really is. From the layman, they may see that Target logo and say, oh, it's just two circles, I could do that. But the behind the scenes,
they didn't really see what happened behind the
that
scenes.
Probably took 8 months to get to
where
that Target.
It started.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just that it's such a thoughtful process. I
actually think that's a compliment. If something looks easy and it looked like that could have been really easy to do, I think that's a compliment to your graphic design skills. Instead of looking at something and go, oh my God, that looks really, really complicated. It looked so easy. And actually what they didn't see is what it took to get to there.
Yeah, exactly. I had pulled up this quote by Paula Scher, who's a famous graphic designer, that I guess this is kind of related, but at one point she responded to a question saying that it took her a few seconds to draw a logo, but it took her 34 years to learn how to draw it in a few seconds. So I guess in a similar note, even if the Target logo did take 10 minutes, there's probably still a lot of thought behind it that person needed to have in order to get in the mindset to be able to do that. So
yeah.
But nothing takes me 10 minutes, just to clarify. Like I've never done a logo.
Alyssa and I worked together. What we came out with, now that I look at it objectively, is that it does look like it could have just happened so quickly and so easily. But it was definitely a process for us to get there. And once we got there, we were like, aha, that's it, completely, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But it did not just happen that way. So So I think that's the part where she listens really well and then provides some really good, feedback.
So Alyssa, thank you again for your time today. This was great and very cool to hear about the behind the scenes. It's just not, doing awesome graphic design, but it's a whole process behind that. And we want to thank you so much for that. And to the listeners, we want to thank you guys for joining us today. And please be sure to review this episode. And for more information on who we are or this podcast, please visit www.bammit.com. That's BAMM-IT.com. And we're going to carry on with part 2. In the next podcast, we're going to interview a
digital marketing
firm. And Alyssa, did you want to share any contact information?
Oh, sure. My website is ampeddesigns.com, and that's AMPD Designs. So the D repeats. There are 2 Ds. So, yeah, feel free to check it out.
Okay. Yeah.
And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The hosts and the guests of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice and is for entertainment purposes. It is not guaranteed that you will find this as entertaining as the hosts find themselves.